Hello and welcome to Do the Impossible with Jason and Stephen, the podcast that seeks to inspire and amaze you. And now please welcome your hosts, Jason Michaels and Stephen Bargatze. Welcome everybody to the Do the Impossible podcast with Jason and Stephen. I am Jason Michaels, and my partner in crime, Stephen Bargatze, is at his own residence today because what did you do, Stephen? Tell him the story.
Because Stephen is an idiot.
Well, dude, by the time they hear this podcast, you may be completely healed up, but you did this.
God, I pray I am. I broke my foot on Thanksgiving over my son's house playing basketball, and I am about 35 years too older to be playing basketball. But I have grandkids that talk me into it. The funny thing about that is Nate, my son, broke his thumb, and when I was coaching him and I made him play the second half, I kept saying, "It ain't broke, get back out there." And then my grandson broke his ankle, and I thought, it's just sprain. Tape it up, get back out there. Turned out it was broken. I made him play the second half. So as soon as I broke my foot, my grandson goes, "Pop, get back out here." He goes, so I had to finish. But anyway, long story short, I was supposed to stay off my foot. Apparently I didn't. My cast started to break. I actually got the very duct tape that I use. I figured I could duct tape my cast back together, and I could probably make it until my next appointment in 10 days. Found out that was the very wrong thing to do, and only idiots do that. And so I broke my foot even worse. And so now I can't leave my house. I can't get off of these two chairs and the bed. That's it. So this is all on me.
So in the moral of the story is that we have a lot of podcasts to record while you're stuck at your house. Is that the story?
Basically,
right.
At least I go back Christmas Eve to go let them tell me if I'm going to have surgery or not. But we'll find out.
Okay. All right. Well,
I'm excited about this. It's not going to take me 2 takes to get my name right.
Look, yeah, that is true. I couldn't even say my name a minute ago. Oh gosh, I tell you what. Well, hey guys, we're super excited because today we are joined by our special guest, Zak Mirz. And am I supposed to say Zak Mirz, or is it okay to call you Zak Mirz, Zak?
Yeah, no, you nailed my last name. You know, during this quarantine, I changed it from Zak Mirz to Zak Mirz because it just was a good marketing move that everybody was telling me. Nobody could ever pronounce my last name nor spell it. So I changed to Zak Mirz, but if you Google Mirzada, it should show up because it's a very confusing last name.
Yeah. No, and you know what's cool is that one of the reasons that we got Zak to do today's podcast is because I had the pleasure of meeting him earlier this year when I was part of a project where it was called the Stable Sessions, and they had it's a streaming show that you could. It's confusing for me to explain. It's a very cool project, but Zak was part of it. Sean Emery was part of it. Brock Gill was part of it. I was part of it. And during the filming of one of the parts of the show, we all very briefly told little tiny pieces of our story, our own personal stories. And when Zak told a little bit of his story, I was blown away. And when Stephen and I started the podcast and I was thinking about people who would be cool guests, I was like, I would love to get Zak. And so Zak, thanks for being part of the show, man. Thanks for participating.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me, man. Thank you so much for having me.
So, the goal of our podcast is to amaze and inspire people. And the amaze side of things is because Stephen and I are magicians, and sometimes it's cool that we get friends who are magicians. You are a professional magician.
I am. Yeah. I think I'm a professional magician. So I don't know. I don't know what the litmus test is, but I think I've done it enough times.
Yeah. And then the inspire side of it is about the stories of life, the stories of overcoming, the stories of resilience, and what we've learned from basically our life's experiences. So since tell us a little bit about. I want to get into your entire story, but since we've already broached the topic of being a magician, Why don't you tell us a little bit about how you kind of got inspired by magic, or how long have you been doing it? Just tell us, yeah, share with us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so everybody kind of has a story of getting bit by the magic bug, but for me, I was a kid, 8 years old. I saw the David Blaine special, and he was, and you got to remember, like, I'm brown, and my family's from Afghanistan and Iran, and this is one of the first time they've ever seen magic. So we're watching this on television, and we just couldn't explain it at all. And in my mind, I was just like, that's what I want to do for the rest of my life. So I dressed like David Blaine. I talked like David Blaine. My uncle took me to the magic shop, and we bought like all the tricks we could find that David Blaine did on TV. And, as you grow older, do what?
Which is where he got them all the first.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It might have been the same magic shop. Who knows?
First of all, I did think on that right there. I hate to keep. I'm not going to interrupt you a bunch. that we have a David. That there are a new generation of people, magicians, that was inspired by David. And I do remember when he first came out, there was people that did not like the idea of where David was. But even from the beginning, I always knew that David, he has raised magic to a whole new level, and he made it. I feel like he's one of the most persons that made it popular to be a magician.
Mm-hmm.
He went from magic and this is to this is really, really cool and stuff. And so I've always been a big fan of David. I think he's great, and I think what he's done for magic is great. And that he captured an 8-year-old kid, that sounds awesome.
Yeah.
So David Blaine inspired you, and
yeah, and back to what Steven said as well, like the fact, like I love people in the industry just being, I think the word is disruptive of what they think magic is. Like, very much like David Blaine is like the Banksy of magic. Like he took things and just completely turned it upside down in a way that was fresh and cool, and people like me, a generation like me, that very much look up to David. Yeah, it's good stuff, man.
Great. So you went as an 8-year-old and just started pursuing this magic bug thing.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, and then like anybody, when you get started, you're just a product of versions of people you inspire to be. Yep. So you take a little bit of David, and you take a little bit of Copperfield, a little bit of Chris Angel at the time was popular as well, and then you just kind of grow older, and you become more secure in who you are, and then you dress the way Zak wants to dress, and you talk the way Zak wants to talk, and you start to create your own magic tricks people you hope people like, and when you try to create who you are with that, it hasn't been a proven product, so you're going to bomb a lot, you're going to fail a lot in front of people, because it's just kind of like finessing and massaging and tilting the character you want to present into the world, and that just takes a lot of time and a lot of work and a lot of experience, and then hopefully by the end of it, if you keep at it, hopefully you could do it for a living. But even that's hard.
So when was all this bombing happen from 8-year-old till 18? I mean, were you actually trying to do magic in school? And were you, because I think what's good about David is he had some gimmickry things and stuff that a kid could do, but also he was big on sleight of hand. So you really had to learn the profession. And if you wanted to do tricks the way David did, he added the sleights and everything to make them so much better, elevated them. So in that part, I think that's good. But so were you actually doing stuff as a young kid?
Yeah, I think the great thing about being a kid and not being at the level of someone like David Blaine or like Copperfield is you have the space to fail a lot. You're not at that caliber, you're not at that caliber where everybody's always looking at you and they're expecting so much of you. So being a kid, and just being my brain isn't fully developed and you're not embarrassed about anything. You just go and try out a little bit of everything. There's a coffee shop about 10 minutes away from me, and me and my wife went there recently, and it was the first time I actually stepped on quote unquote stage. It was an open mic night. And just did a few things and felt horrible about myself because what you have on paper and what you do in front of an audience, like when people say anything in the audience, it just completely throws you off. It's like, let me go through my script, and I worked so hard on this. So,
I don't remember your part.
Yeah. So over time, I love it. Like I have space in my show as well when I want to experiment and try new things. It's a good spot. It's kind of in between two strong routines where I can just kind of throw it out there and see how it goes. And I think that's the best thing. There's a book that I read years ago called it's called Little Bets. And it was kind of like the founding of Apple and Pixar and all these organizations, but they talk about like how they kind of threw everything out and letting a lot of things be experimental. And with that, one will hit really hard. So you don't really know what's going to work until you just kind of throw out there and see, what fish hooks actually hook on. So I'm a big experimental person where I just throw out a bunch of different things and hopefully something will stick.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that can only come from having. I mean, that's the problem, especially during this pandemic now. Where I've struggled with that, trying to start back some shows. You want to do what's best, and you got to go back. And I know these are good, but also I know I've got to change. I've got to come up with stuff that's not involving people as much. I've got to, it's sad for all of us physical comics and stuff to have to go. And some people are gonna get offended by this, but like, oh man, I got to do minimalism now.
Yeah.
And I don't mean that in a bad way because it can be done. I know it can. It's very funny minimalism and stuff. But you gotta have a place where you can do that, and even where you could be bad. But I think you're exactly, and this shows me you've got. I'm convinced that you put in the time because you knew right where to put that. You would never start with something new. You never would end with anything new or something like that. Your experimentation, you got to make them like you first.
Yeah.
And then you can win the right to try something. And then I remember Nathan, my son, the comedian, when one of his jokes in his early career, and he actually wrote the joke. He said something and he wrote, and he said, well, you know what? That was a lot funnier at midnight when I wrote that than it was now. But that's the joke. That was his punchline. He knew going into that this joke would not be good, but what would get the laugh is saying that it was funnier at midnight.
Yes.
Last night when I wrote it. And so I just remember thinking, oh, that's smart to know that, for him to know well, this is where the joke's going to really be. And it's smart for you to realize that, okay, sandwiched between two good routines, I can get away with some of that experimentation that I might try.
Yeah. Yeah. And your son, Nathan, is a perfect example of systems that I've kind of developed in my professional career. Like I haven't strayed away from magic, but I've really kind of deep dive into the comedy world because I wanted to understand how comedy works and how they work, because comedians are one of the hardest working professions out there. It's very hard and it takes a lot of grind to actually get your first 60 minutes. And what I realized, what comedians do and if there's like a little tidbit that I've never shared before, like that people get away from magicians, it's this: comedians, they experiment all the time. So they write lines, they rehearse, they perform. But what great comedians do after that very few magicians do, is they watch film. They watch themselves and see, oh, that cadence didn't work. That line didn't work. The way I did that just didn't. And a lot of magicians will rehearse and perform, but very few will actually set up an iPhone at the back of the venue and record themselves. And then to the next show, they'll watch film and do it all over again. It's what every great athlete does as well. They practice, they perform, they watch film, they do it over again. So that's something I've developed in my profession. Just picking up on comedians is they always watch themselves all the time, and they're always going to like 10 open mic nights, as well, and just trying out little things as well. So
Nate still goes to those when he's in town just to get himself doing it. Well, one example of what you just said was we were in Cincinnati doing a big theater, and right in 2 shows, and Nathan had a punchline that it's a killer punchline, and it just kills, and it didn't, and it just like, so we get on the bus to go back to the next city, and Nate is just going crazy over that. Like, I can't understand why this punchline. I must have done something wrong. And so the film guy was in there, and they went and found it, and found out that right when he was delivering it, a bat flew across behind him. You see a bat flying up in the air and going around. And okay, I can sleep in because it wasn't him. It was just bat. But real quick before we go on, the co-host over there, Jason, has been doing the same kind of thing that you're doing, and I know that he's been working in the comedy world too. I've had to drag him, in there because I think it's so perfect to. I think everybody needs to work on that side of their life anyway. Not just because everything has to be funny, but I think you're right that you can learn. So just real quick, Jason, I'm putting you on the spot.
Yeah, sure. Well, the thing that I learned from, there's a lot you can learn from comedy, but I think it is absolutely there's almost a paralyzing fear with comedy when you are willing to walk out on stage. And the couple of times that I've said, I am just going to do comedy, you walk out, and as a magician, I'm used to having a prop that I know that as long as I do this trick, that I'm going to get a certain type of reaction. But with comedy, you're standing up there and you're saying the whole idea here is that I'm going to tell you a story or say something, and you're going to laugh. And that's the arrangement that you're making with the audience. And so when you walk up to that microphone, and when I walk up to that microphone without a magic trick, and my goal is to make people laugh, that is a scary moment. I will say the biggest thing that I learned is it actually is exactly what Zach is talking about. Being willing to, even if you're not watching, but replaying everything in your head and saying, looking at your jokes and saying that worked sort of, but it didn't work the way I thought it was going to work. This one did work. And I know there's a better way to phrase this or to say this or the cadence or whatever. There's no question that constant review is what is necessary to succeed with comedy. But I would honestly say that the big thing that I learned is just there's a certain amount of bravery. Just flat out bravery that it takes to stand up in front of an audience and say, let's do this.
The first 100 times, and you just know it's not going to be good, and you just want to keep doing it. And once you get bit by that bug too, it's just one of those things like magic. You just want to keep going on stage and doing it over and over. And it's harder in comedy because you have to, with magic, it's like, hey, let me get your opinion on something real quick and go into like your little magic trick or routine you want to do, right? You could just do that at the coffee shop. But with comedy, you can't just go to a tabletop of 4 and be like, hey, let me try out this new bit on you. It's just harder, that road, So
I'll tell you where it's really hard to do comedy is a prison.
Yeah.
I seem to do really well there, but
Bargatze does really well in prison. I've seen a couple of comedians burn up in prison because the audience they're either great audiences or they're brutally difficult just because. I think it's easier to be a magician in a prison than it is to be a comedian.
You have to be brave to be a comedian.
Yeah, you do.
In prison, you can't have any fear because they smell fear.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing to what Zach was saying too, he said real quick, you got to be willing to do it 100 times. I see that a lot of magicians that look into comedy, that want to add comedy to their act, they give up too soon. They try one time and they don't get the laugh. They go, well, then forget it, and they're out of it. Comedy, if I'm doing a new bit, and that's why I keep going back to what you said, putting it in between two good things. I might not want to walk away from it so fast because I think it takes me a good 6 to 8 months, if not longer, for when I can go, okay, I'm 90% of the way done with that bit, and it's funny, and I'll keep it. And now it can become something I can put in between or use it anytime. I've worked out all the bugs. Nothing's hilarious or funny when you first start doing it.
Yeah.
Because in our business, I'm sorry, we write the jokes, but we're not the judge. They are. They
Hmm.
don't laugh. It's not then we didn't find that audience or we didn't find that sense of humor that I didn't. I have to change some stuff and be willing
Yeah.
to do that. I think it's pretty brave. So I just want to go back to you, Zach. You started off not so much comedy, but
Yeah, I was like my first love or my first pursuit was mentalism, kind of where I know we're kind of like touching on it earlier and doing the Zoom show because you know, when I was 9, you know, I bought 10, 11, like I bought 13 Steps to Mentalism because there was something in me that was like, there's something real about this and I want to find out what it is. So I went on that deep dive for many years, like trying to figure out how to really read somebody's mind. And what I realized was that although it wasn't real, that doesn't mean the experience of it couldn't be real for someone else.
okay.
So I did mentalism, got, you know, and then I was like, oh, I'm above card magic, you know, that's, you know, that. So I love mentalism, got back into card magic. And then really and this is something I learned from Pete Holmes as well. I'm a big Pete Holmes fan, but he said, and this is where it really clicked with me. He said, if you could just make the audience laugh, you could give them whatever you need to give them, you know, whatever message, whatever, anything.
Yeah.
So that's kind of my philosophy is if you could just get them on your side, if you could just make them laugh, if you could just make them have a good time, then the magic doesn't matter anymore. And back to your point, Stephen, a lot of magicians, yeah, they buy this $24.99, you know, trick at the magic shop, and it's set lines, it's set punchlines, and you could just get it out of, you know, the bag and start doing it. And there was a time in comedy where there was a lot of hack lines going back and forth with a lot of comedian. I forget what year it was where it really transitioned from you know, being these hack lines to self-revelation comedy, where it's like it happens within your experiences and then you talk about it to your audience, right? So that's the thing with magic is, you know, you give up on it too soon, or you're disappointed in how the method works, and you give up on it before you even started it. And if you look at people like Copperfield, you know, Copperfield's been doing a majority of his routines for a very long time. And the reason why he's great is because he's done it 1,000 times. He doesn't put new material in often. And that's the thing I'm fascinated by the comedy world is like they massage it, they tilt it, they experiment with it until it gets great. And it's hard getting your first 60
Yeah.
minutes, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Right. My favorite Copperfield story was because I mean, people always say, you know, even when I talked about Jason in the beginning, people say, well, Jason really, really funny. I used to go, well, he's Copperfield funny. And by that's not an insult necessarily. If you go see David Copperfield, you're not going to see a comedian, but you will laugh. There's a
Mhm.
lot of laughs in his show that he has put in there and built in there. One of the things I remember in the 90s, maybe, that he had a lady in the front row that pulled out a pair of binoculars to look at him. And he would just come out and go, really? Really? Come here. And she'd come up and he'd take them from her and he'd put them and look at her and go, how does that make you feel? You're
Mhm.
in the front row. That was a paid staff member. Now that happened one time in a show, and he did that, and it got a great laugh. And since comedy is not really his game, it was so important. He realized I need that moment every night, and he
Yes.
was willing to pay a staff member money to go, and he'd set them in the front row, a beautiful girl, and he'd give them a pair of binoculars. And it happened every show, every night. And he paid for that to happen. Because that's how important it is, like you said, to make them laugh. Or, Lucio Ball, I can name thousands of comedians that said it's basically the same thing. Make them like you.
Yes. Yeah.
If they like you, you can do anything. You can take them anywhere you want to go.
What's interesting about that is one of the things that it's a good point. When we were doing the stable session, Zach and I, one of the things I remember when we were doing our sort of a round robin magic, I remember when Zach got up, he has an instant likability. There's just sort of an effort. I don't want to say effervescent. That's not the right word, but just almost an infectious smile and laughter in the audience. The moment he got up, there was a good energy. There was, and the audience really liked him, and I liked the person that he was up there. So you figured out how to do that based on what I've seen, Zach. Does that come naturally to you? Is that something you had to learn?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, it's honestly, and it goes back to your question, Jason and Steven. It's like he created that line over and over again. And how many times at the end of the show where you're like, man, what is that one thing that happened in this one place? Like, I wish, man, I want to, it's such a good line, but that was through stand up. So like, I go out, like I have a soft opener in my show now where I go out and I believe I said this in the stable session, but like I used to have really long hair and I still do it now in my Zoom shows, but I'm like, hey, is my hair okay? I'm like, hey, don't you lie to me right now. Is my hair okay? Oh, you did? Okay, good. All right, let's start. And then in my live show, I'm like, in a moment, a magician's about to come out. I'm going to play the role of a magician. So it's like this soft opener where I'm letting the audience into my life. And then the show starts. So I literally go out with a different attire on stage and I do this whole thing. And then the show starts. So that came from just doing comedy where you don't have any props and it's like, hey, it's my hair. You just find things now and you're not hidden behind your props. So that's something that I'm forever grateful in the comedy world where you could leave your props at home and just kind of experiment of who you are. And I think the difference between a good comedian and a great comedian is their self-awareness of themselves. If they understand what they look like, and if they understand who they are, then they could kind of have those moments, because for me, like I'm very aware I've got crazy hair. I'm Persian, so I got a big nose, and like I'm very aware of like who I am, so I could say it before they even think it. And then there's no awkwardness anymore within the show. And then you could just start from there and just kind of move on. And I think,
oh man, wow.
So yeah.
That makes me want to go in two different directions. So there's the one direction I want to go. I want to learn because you're talking about you and being self-aware and where you come from. And I want to learn about the very beginning of that. But at the same time, I was wondering, in today's world with cancel culture and people not being happy, you can't say this, you can't say that, you can't insult anybody. What you're saying is you have to be self-aware because whether or not people want you to say it, people are thinking it. Is that where you're going with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing, like I do the college world as well. And there's some very progressive colleges and they prefer to be pronounced, they have, I don't know what it's called, but they have like their preferred pronoun. They have their preferred pronouns. Yeah. So, and that was new to me, like in the middle of the show, like I was learning it in the middle of the show while I was doing it at Earlham College early last year. So
that's great.
So it's like one of those things where, I just like, I like kind of like the charm of like who Channing Pollock was, the magician in 19 whatever years he was doing his thing. He's kind of like the James Bond of magic. So I want to be like polite and I want people to have a good time. And I want it to be about me. But what great comedians do when comedians talk about themselves, the audience will be like, I relate to that guy. I've been through that. So you don't really have to point at them. You can point at yourself, but what they'll realize is they've been through the same experiences that you have.
That's great.
And that's where kind of the connection comes. So I don't know if that answers your question.
No, that's, you know what, that's great.
So-
That's great. But you, okay, so you were telling us, some of the things I've heard in the last 25 minutes or so is that, maybe 30, is that your parents came from Iran and Afghanistan. I heard you
Mhm.
say you're Persian. I heard you talk about getting into magic at 8 or 9. But one of the reasons is one of the reasons you got into magic because magicians know how to keep secrets. Because one of the things that is interesting about your life story is that there were some secrets involved.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, my dad came from Iran, like I mentioned before, and as he was learning English, he got paid $2.25 at an Italian restaurant. And 10 years later, he got his own Italian restaurant and met my mom. They got married in this restaurant. It was a, fine dining Italian restaurant experience, right? Live piano music and everything. And then they had me. I was 1. My brother was 2 at the time. What happened was my dad was locking up the doors to his Italian restaurant and walking to his car so he could come see us, his family. And as he was walking to his car, he got met by 3 masked men, and these men stopped my dad. They took his money. My dad got up. He started running away. These men caught up to my dad, and they pulled out their guns and they shot him 6 times, and they killed my father. And I was 1. My brother was 2. And growing up, we kind of were aware that people have dads. Like, where is dad? And growing up, my family was like, oh, he's in Iran. He has a job. He'll come back one day. And then when we're old enough to actually comprehend the news, I was 8. My brother was 9. My mom was like, hey, your father was killed when you were 1. And me and my brother didn't really know how to react. Like, it's one thing to know and have an experience with a father, and then your father isn't there anymore. But we just, my mom never got remarried. We don't know what it means to have an earthly father. And at the time, I just saw everybody have their dads. Like, it's dads would come at the cafeteria in elementary school and have, lunch with their sons and daughters and things like that. So I just kept it to myself because I was embarrassed about it. And then we found David Blaine and we started watching him. And I was like, I want to be a magician. I want to be just like David Blaine, because magic was the perfect art form for me to run to, because it was an art form really all about secrets. And that was the thing that helped me cope with my father's news. And yeah, and I think through struggles and through adversity, people find things to cope with it. And just for me, it just happened to have been magic.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's, yep. I don't even know what to say after that. That's one of those where it just kind of like, I mean, that smacks you in the face. I can't even imagine what it would be like to get that type of news. I mean, I like to think of myself as a very empathetic person, but I'll just tell you right now, I don't have a clue what that would feel like. I mean, it must feel like the biggest gut punch in the world. Where
Well, one thing that stuck out to me, everything, and I mean your story, you just want to go bless your heart, and it's a shame that something like that happened to your father here. But I heard you say that you didn't know what it was like to have an earthly father, and that made me think that maybe faith or something else you do know about. Is that stepping out of the way and asking that question, or?
Yeah. Yeah. Part of my story is like, as I've grown older, what I've realized is like outside of the comedy world and the magic world, like this is what we do. But I think a better question is asking ourselves why we do it. And for me, part of the reason why I do it is to share a message of love, hope, grace, and redemption to young adults and college students all over the nation. And I talk about, my full story about my father and how we have a heavenly father, and just giving a message of hope to people. And through that, I've realized what I realize is like we're so much bigger than just what we do. And this is something like a little David Blaine article I've kind of like made my business decisions and my whys from. David, a long time ago, was interviewed, and the question he always asks himself before he does anything is, am I willing to do it for $1?
Yeah.
And if the answer is yes, then he'll do it for whatever is negotiated. But if the answer is no, $20 million could be in front of him and he'll just decline it. He'll never see it. So part of it is going to churches and giving a message of hope. Part of it is a couple of years ago, I always have a deck of cards in my hand, and I read a little booklet on like the business of human trafficking. And when people understand like how bad human trafficking is, the question is like, what can I do to help? And I took kind of a deck of cards that I created and partnered it with an organization out in Nashville called Hope for Justice. And that organization is an organization that fights to eradicate human trafficking. So they hire like undercover operatives, they go to Cambodia, they raid pimp houses and get boys and girls out of human trafficking. So 100% of the proceeds from those cards and the awareness went to go fight human trafficking. So although I absolutely love what we do, I always ask the question of like why we do it and how we could use our skill sets and our experiences to really give back to the community, because I believe that everybody has a gift and everybody has a talent, and there are writers that just haven't written, and there's artists that just haven't painted. And when you have a gift that is in you and you give it out into the world, then really you become the hero in somebody else's story, and you become a light in a dark place. And to me, that's magic. That is magic.
That is beautiful.
So yeah.
Well, I want to know more. I want to know how did this 8-year-old boy get to have the knowledge of the Heavenly Father? And
I actually, yeah, me too. I want to know that too, because
it's an amazing.
Yeah, I think a lot of people would get lost there. To find out that your dad was murdered in a senseless act. I think a lot of people would end up lost adults. How in the world did you how did that happen? How did you?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, my mom raised us well. When you come from like a Middle Eastern background, they don't ground you. They like hit you really hard, so you never do it again. So my mom was a really good mom for me and my brother. But yeah, man, I was a sophomore in high school, and I saw this magician. He came to my high school, and he did a magic show, but he also shared the gospel. And that was kind of the seed that was planted in my life. And I as I said, like, you're a young kid, you don't care about failing, you're not self-aware. So I'm just the guy. At the end of the show, I was like, hey man, I loved your show. I want to be a magician. And also, my mom is working right now. If it's not too big of an ask, can you take me home? So he packed up his whole show, and then I went into his car and he dropped me off home that night. And from there, his version of the story was this. I had like this little PK rings I was selling. Like, I was a hustler back in high school. So I would buy it wholesale, and I would go on eBay and like triple the price and sell it to magicians. So I just like rebrand it for magicians. And when he dropped me off that night, I was like, hey man, I've got like a little, and for people that don't know what a PK ring is, it's just like a magic ring. So you could beat me out if I'm given too much exposure here. But anyways, I was like, hey man, do you want one of these rings? I sell them. He was like, nah man, let's just hang out again. And that was the moment where he was like, yeah, I want to take this kid under my wing. So he taught me magic, but he also taught me about who Jesus was and what he did for all of us. And a few days later, I gave my life to Jesus. I think I was a sophomore in high school, or a senior in high school. So a few years later. And then from there, I went to a Bible school for a summer, and then I started touring with him as well. So for 4 years, I was touring with him, and every single night I was backstage just listening to how he did a magic show and how he shared the gospel every single night. And we did only university. So sometimes it would be a college room of drunk kids. Sometimes I would just get like really high and come to the show. And every night I would just watch him deal with the crowd and the heckles. And sometimes it would be amazing shows. Sometimes it would be not so much, but every night he would share the gospel. And I think that is the best thing that has ever happened to me as a performer, but also as a leader. Is I believe that if you want to get into any industry, like find a person that is willing to lead you and show you the ropes before you could lead, and show someone else. It's the relationships that rabbis had with their disciples as well. And I just kind of take that system and apply it to what I do. So to answer your question, I know I'm kind of getting away from it, is it was this guy and he shared with me the gospel, and just knowing that. Yeah, so it was Maze. It was Maze Ministries,
Yep.
and the guy is Jim Monroe, and we still talk all the time, and yeah, he's an amazing person.
Yeah, he's got a great book. Jim has a great book. I actually got to, interestingly enough, I knew who he was, and when a couple of years ago I met him, we were both at the Derek Del Gaudio show together.
Oh,
and
cool.
We also, the very next night, we were both at the Darren Brown show together in New York. And I was like, I guess we're following each other around, and we just started talking. He's a really nice guy, really nice guy.
He's amazing, and his show was fantastic. Like, it was a full production. Like, they had a whole rig truck that they were touring with. Like, it was no 2-suitcase airplane show. Like, it was the real deal, as well. But he taught me so much. Like, I would be nowhere near where I am today if I didn't have those experience. Like, it's just so, it certainly accelerates the process if you just could learn under someone as well.
I see why Jason's attracted to you, because you need to go back whenever this all gets released. The second podcast when Jason shares his life about learning to share and doing all that and being forced to do stuff. But also Jason spent a couple of years with Brett Daniels. And
okay, who's Brett Daniels again? It rings a bell.
Yeah, Brett was he was like the one magician who was on, I think, 4 of the 5 world's greatest magic specials back in the day in like the 90s. He was the one who kept reappearing on there. And then he had a show that was in Tunica, Mississippi, and he traveled all over the world, big time illusionist. He actually, it was the co-creator of The Illusionists, the show.
Oh, okay.
So Brett created that with Simon Painter. So that was.
Okay. Yeah. And is that organization, like, is it under like the Works agency? Because I know.
Well, it was. It's. I think they're owned by Cirque du Soleil now. Actually.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Yeah. Which, who knows who they're owned by after Cirque du Soleil declared bankruptcy. So
I heard from a source, like, because of the pandemic. Anyways, we don't have to go there, but yeah.
so listen, what's cool about this is that you were inspired by David Blaine, and I heard a story that he FaceTimed you one time, like your hero.
Yes. And I'm still, to this day, man, I'm still like pinching myself because I couldn't believe what was happening. So, as we're recording right now, and you could bleep this if you want it to be, but we're at 2020. Yeah. And I always tell people this, outside of like the horrible things that have happened this year, it's been some of the most, it's been one of the best years of my life. I don't know how else to say it.
That's fantastic.
Just with some of the experiences and just doors opened. And one of them was, I was getting done with a workout, and one of Blaine's consultants DMs me on Instagram, and all it says is, "What is your number?" And in my mind, I associate this guy with David Blaine. And a few moments later, I get to my apartment, and my wife and I were like, okay, this guy just, why did I steal something? Like a million things are going through your head. Like, it's just such a vague, out of the blue question. And a few moments later, I get this FaceTime, And I typically wouldn't like pick up at all, but I see like the numbers from New York, and I know, Blaine is in New York, and so is his consultants. And I pick it up, and he is on a motorcycle. And at the time, he was in LA, FaceTiming me as he was in LA traffic. And there was a million.
Safe.
But here, the only time I've ever, and I've talked to him a handful of times since then, Blaine will only FaceTime. And I don't know why, but I just thought it was one of the coolest things ever. So ever since he started doing it, like, you look up to your inspiration. So I only like FaceTime people now too, because it's one of those things where you could connect with people more rather than doing like audio. But anyways, he calls me, he was like, "Hey, what's up?" In a very David Blaine voice. I'm like, "Hey man, what's going on? What do you need?" And he goes, "Well, you have a trick and I want to learn it. We're doing a special during this pandemic, and it's called The Magic Way, and it's out already. And I wanna do that." I'm like, "Awesome, absolutely." And he was like, "Well, let's connect and go from there." So just 24, 48 hours later, we connect, and I'm teaching him how to do this trick. And all day I was just kind of pinching myself because I couldn't believe what was happening, because it's just not often your hero reaches out to you for something. And I teach him how to do this trick with a knife. It's a very, when I first created this trick in my mind, I was like, this is something David Blaine would do. And in a few years later, after releasing it, it very much was. So anyways, I teach him the trick, and he was the nicest person in the world. And it's kind of crazy because like sometimes it's like, okay, I taught him how to do this, I'm never going to hear from him again. But every now and then, I just, out of the blue, he'll just, "How are you doing?" He's just so nice. He is so nice.
That's really
And
cool.
anyways, he produced a special called The Magic Way. It was on CBS, and then it went on Hulu. And he does the trick in his special. So I think they were trying to get like new material together, because I think CBS was like, "Hey, we're in a pandemic, we want to do this special, give hope to people." So he was kind of getting all his material together to do this quick turnaround. And
That's pretty awesome.
I was grateful enough to help him in a very small way to do this special. And he was just the nicest guy to me. I still can't believe it. I shared this story in my show, and when you see him, I texted him and I was like, "Hey man, I just want you to know you do that like way better than I do. And I've been doing this for like 8 years, just so you know." So all that to say was I was just grateful for the opportunity. And
Now,
yeah.
is this the show? Is this trick the trick that I saw you do on the Huckabee show?
Yes.
Tell us about that. I saw a video
Yeah.
of this. I remember hearing you were going to do this. We talked, and I was I saw it online. It looked great.
Yeah, it's so funny. I close my show with it now, and it's one of those things where you could have a spectator do it. So basically, Stephen, if you're not familiar with it, it's like basically a full stack stab. So basically, you basically say your card is the 14th card, and we're going to stab to the 14th card, and then you count as 13, and the 14th card is their selected card. So in my show now, I tell that story. And then I stab it on the bar stool, and I was like, "You know what? It would be okay if I did it, but I could do it. I'm the magician." But I'm like, "But if you could do it," and I pointed like a big guy in the front row. I was like, "But if you were to do it right now, then that would be amazing." And then he comes on stage, and then I teach him how to do the trick, and he has this massive knife in his hands, and I whisper in his ear so the whole audience could hear me. I'm like, "Hey, I just want you to know, I've only taught 2 people in the whole entire world how to do this. The first person is David Blaine. And right now it's you. So don't screw this up." So I get out of the way. So I'm like literally like stage left. He does it, he counts it, and then he takes the next card and he shows it to the audience, and it's his card that he signed. And there's like this confetti drop on him. And it's just like this great moment for the audience and him. So yeah, I tell that story in my show, but yeah, it's good stuff, man. I love that trick.
That is cool.
You know what? That the people that don't know is what's so great about our business is that we do get to meet our heroes. I mean, what other, look at all the millions of kids that play baseball, but they don't get to go meet the guy that they grew up with. Oh, when are you ever going to get to sit and talk to them? But we get to do that. And I mean, that's good for David. But, I've had the same privilege of meeting so many great guys in Magic and be able to just talk to them. And that's something special about what we do.
Yeah, it's amazing. Like even going to these conventions, you turn and it's like, whoa, there he is, and oh my goodness, there he is as well, and they're all just in this massive room together. It's such a cool. I love it. It's amazing.
So, we're very fortunate. So you're working on some new projects, and we were talking a little while ago, and there's a project you're working on around the magic words. What is it?
Yeah. So I love history, and I love just, we're standing on the shoulders of giants in our industry. Like, we create something and we think it's new, and it's like, no, like in the 1600s, like this guy created it and it was the first time, anyways, I've always been fascinated because in magic there's so many beautiful historical staples in our industry that I don't think the public understands. Like, I had my neighbor, my neighbor's brother texted her and was like, hey, I know you're live next to a magician. We're doing like this Halloween thing and I'm a magician. Could I borrow his cape and top hat? And, I think, and a lot of people think that's what magic is. So what I'm trying to do is like, in a really young, cool way, do like a dramatized version of magic. So what we're working on right now is the word hocus pocus. And hocus pocus comes from the transubstantiation. And I barely knew how to pronounce that word when I first heard it. But what that means is hocus pocus came from the Catholic Church. And when the Catholic priest and the Catholic Church gathers for communion, even today, they would utter the words hocus corpus meum, which means this is my body. And at the end of the prayer, they believed that the bread would turn into the flesh of Jesus and the wine would turn into the blood of Jesus. So some magician at the time in the 1600s heard the words that the priest said, this fake Latin phrase, hocus corpus meum, and coined the term hocus pocus. And it became very popular, obviously. And some believe this magician misheard what the priest was saying, but others say he wanted to take the power behind the words to heighten the drama of his own magic act. And the first person that made that connection was an Archbishop of Canterbury, John Tilson, and he said, the word magician's use of hocus pocus is nothing more than, the trick of transubstantiation. And so it goes. Here we have hocus pocus today. And all that to say is there's so much richness in the magic community that has amazing roots that we have no clue about. Like the word abracadabra, translated, one of the translation, kind of the foundation of it, some people believe it means the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, literally the breath of life, like abacadabra. So we're kind of tapping into that, like magic history and the relationship it has with church and culture and why we even use it today.
Wow.
So
that sounds like a very deep, heavy interest. Like that's something that I would be very interested in. It sounds like there's a lot of research that goes into that.
It is. It's a lot of research, a lot of development. And we're trying to do it where it's like cool hip hop music in the background. And it's like kind of like a mix between like the Bible Project and drunk history. So it's kind of like this dramatized thing where we put it all together in like sound bites. So it's like 3-minute videos as well. So that's kind of what we're working on right now, which is a lot of fun.
Right, that's good.
He should meet Doug Powell.
Oh yeah, he should meet Doug Powell. Doug Powell, you guys, yeah, we should introduce the two of you. Doug is
okay.
Yeah.
What does he do?
That connection.
Is he like a historian? Because I'm like a dumb magician, so I'm like relying on all these other smart guys to give me the information to produce these things.
Yes. Yes, he's totally big time historian. And yes, yes.
And with the
Oh.
church and in the Catholic Church, he's written probably 20 books and stuff. And he's been his son got interested in magic, and that made him, so he got into it because of his son taking him, and then his son since got out of magic, but Doug kind of still hangs around it.
Yeah.
But
Wow.
played music. He played with Ringo Starr. I mean, the musical and all. I mean, he's just one of the most amazing guys, most talented people.
Really cool dude. Really cool dude.
You guys,
Zach, this
y'all
is.
need to meet.
Go
Wow.
ahead, Steve. Go ahead.
No, they need to meet each other.
Yeah.
I would love that. I would love that. And I would love to connect with you too, Stephen. I've heard a lot about you here and there, but it's nice to finally connect with you as well.
All right.
So the show is about inspiration and amazement, and it's so interesting the things that we can take away, the lessons we can take away as we talk. Like I was interested in some of the things that you were saying, and I just kept thinking to myself, lesson, like life lesson right there. There's a life lesson right there to some of the things. Since it's about both inspiration and amazement, and you are a magician, could we bribe you into amazing us with a magic trick?
This is something I do in my Zoom shows. It's just a lot of I've been having fun with it. So I'm always asking myself, like, what are things you could do around the house and just put in your Zoom show. So I have this let's call it
Those are for like flossing your teeth, right?
with floss with your teeth. Let's try something interesting with these. Let's put this down. You see, it's all about the illusion. See, from this perspective, it looks like it links together.
What?
Which is kind of like a cool little illusion here. But you see, it's all about perspective. See, if I show you a different perspective, like this perspective, it's not connected at all. Huh. Okay. Look at that, Stephen.
I think it's pretty amazing.
That's pretty awesome.
Floss. They're called floss. That's right. So yeah, that's a fun one I've been doing in my Zoom shows. So I'm just kind of like going around my house trying to figure out what to do.
That's awesome.
That's from
That's
the
awesome.
house. So thank you again. Thank you so much, guys. And I know this is kind of like a story and a podcast. And if there's one thing people leave with this podcast or whatever I say, it is the moment you're not doing things for money or a paycheck is the moment you could put real meaning into what you do. That's just something I've always lived by. So I just appreciate it, guys. And it's an honor to be invited and you guys even thinking about me. And this has been so much fun.
Thank you for listening to Do the Impossible with Jason and Stephen. Please subscribe for future episodes. Our home on the internet is jasonmichaelsmagic.com/podcast. That's jasonmichaelsmagic.com/podcast. To contact us, please visit the website and fill out the form. Now go out and do the impossible in your world.